FM, and I mean, I know that we're going to disagree on this. I just know it. We have to disagree on it. It's called Studio 666, and it is R-rated. Is it R-rated? I think it is R-rated.
Yes.
For very good reason. It's 107 minutes in duration. Dave, if you are not a fan of the Foo Fighters, you are not into schlock horror, you can give this a wide berth.
Yeah, very true. Very true. This is a fan film by the band, and there's a lot of things in there that if you're not a Foo Fighters fan, you wouldn't pick up on. So, such as the mansion that it's filmed in being the mansion that the Foo Fighters recorded one of their albums in. It's also it's a famous mansion in Hollywood that a lot of people don't know the history of.
Well, the group is gathered around a boardroom table. Their record label CEO, Jeremy Schill, played by Jeff Garlin, enters with expletives flying. He tells them he's in debt up to his eyeballs, and the Foo Fighters are well overdue on their 10th album. The founder, the guitarist Dave Grohl, thinks a change of scenery might be in order. So the manager makes a phone call. Before you know it, the sextet and their roadies are setting up their equipment in the mansion that Dave has just referenced. It's been vacant for years. That's because it was the site of a horrible, bloodthirsty massacre in 1993. Grohl immediately senses death when he arrives. But the acoustics are so good he can't pass up on the opportunity to record. That's in spite of the fact he can see nasty images and shadowy figures begin popping up regularly. When one of the crew's electrocuted, the writing's on the wall. But somehow Grohl convinces the others to stay put and compile an album as testimony to the deceased. Things go from bad to worse after Grohl discovers a mounted raccoon with its guts wide open and spilling blood in the basement. Before long, Grohl is possessed by the devil. That leaves him unbearable to work with as he tries to create the longest song in the history of rock music, extending well over 40 minutes. Let me just add that the loss of life becomes extensive. Now, I'm going to start off by saying I found Studio 666, named after the devil's number. I've got a story about that in a moment. I found it excruciating to sit through. Sheer cringe value, all about schoolboy theatrics. The story by Grohl and the script, which is ridiculous, is the work of Jeff Bueller and Rebecca Hughes, and I can only imagine they thought they were being funny. They aren't. The humour is puerile. And don't get me started on the acting. By and large, it's appalling, save for Dave Grohl, who I thought did a passable job. It felt like amateur hour, and as for the horror, way, way, way over the top. And in fact, honestly, I can find nothing of merit to commend the movie. The cast and crew may have had fun making this as a passion project. I did not share their enthusiasm after having sat through this second-class mess, which I saw as a total waste of time and space, Gregory King.
You're a little bit harsh here, Alex, but yeah, look, it's something of a vanity project for Dave Grohl, I thought, but the high concept premise falls short in the execution there. I thought that the idea was sort of interesting to start with, and the script is full of moments of self-awareness, but it does become self-indulgent by the end. The script was written, as you said, by Jeff Bueller, who wrote a gory horror film called The Midnight Meat Train a few years ago. And it's taken Grohl's concept and infused it with many of the cliches of the haunted house and horror genre there. It's been directed by a guy called B.J. McDonough, who comes from a background in music videos, having worked with bands like Slayer and that. So it seems attuned to the gross-out demands of this schlocky B-grade horror film, and there's plenty of second-rate gore and grisly effects here, which include projectile vomiting, dismemberments, decapitations, and torrents of fake blood. But I agree with you, Alex, the performances are pretty ordinary here, apart from Grohl, who sort of seems to throw himself into it with delight in playing a very heightened version of himself as an egocentric, sinister musician there. But the rest of the cast, the rest of the band seem like either stunned mullets or deers in the headlights with their performances there. I thought, it's an interesting idea, but they don't capitalise on it. And I thought that for fans of the band, it might be a bit disappointing because there's not enough music to satisfy them. And this is a throwback to the horror films of the 70s and 80s, full of cheesy effects. But one interesting note was the film's opening theme, and that epic tune that assesses Grohl was composed by none other than John Carpenter.
Ah, yes, very, very good. Well, I mean, look, Dave, if The Room can garner a cult following, Studio 666, directed by B.J. McDonald, should be a mozza, should it not?
Oh, look, I think it's got an audience, that is for sure. I mean, there's in LA this weekend, apparently it's very, very difficult to get tickets to go along and see it because they're sold out. But I think you do have to be, like myself, a big fan of schlock horror and also a fan of the Foo Fighters to really appreciate the film. I was kind of surprised that more wasn't made here in Australia of some of the things that make this film unique. A lot of the guitar work in this film is actually not Dave Grohl, it's Steve Vai, who of course most music fans are queuing up to see because Steve Vai doesn't lend his hand to film very, very often, and his albums are normally considered masterpieces. I did think at times the story waned, but I was really surprised by how many members of the Foo Fighters actually put themselves into this film because they're a uniquely private band. People like Pat Smear, I think that was part of the fun part of it for fans, was seeing Pat Smear do something like this because it's so not like him to want to be in the public space like he is in this film. So, look, I think it's a film that's going to be loved by Foo Fighters fans, and I also noticed that a lot of the people that were there the other night are the people that you see at Monster Fest, and this suits them down to a T.
That is not you, Peter Krausz. You're not going to go to Monster Fest, are you? You're not going to enjoy... You're not that sort of guy. You don't like sport. You don't like... What else don't you like, Peter? You're on the psychiatrist's couch now. What else don't you like?
Thank you, Sigmund Freud. No, I actually do enjoy a number of the films at Monster Fest, and I've spoken to a number of filmmakers about some of the horror films. So I'm not averse at all to horror films. I'm just averse to this load of crap. Studio 666, forgetting the Foo Fighters, which I'm not very familiar with, I assessed this on the basis of what sort of film it was. And if it was meant to be a comedic homage to the 80s schlock horror films, Dario Argento and all of those that are very violent and gory, but have atmosphere and have tone. This one has no tone at all. In fact, the attempts at humour are so lame as to be cringeworthy. And the whole thing, especially with the gore and some of the scenes of violence, etc., which are so derivative of so many other films, and that's the problem with this film. It doesn't have an original bone in its body. That the problem with the film is that it is just excessively over the top to the point that many audiences would turn off. Where are the nuances? Where is the humour? Where is something that would explain some of the asinine plot that is supposedly part of this film Studio 666. So I have to say I was cringing through most of the film, and I'm not surprised the film has an R rating, R for revolting.
Yeah, extreme violence, disturbing themes, and totally agree. Score out of 10, Peter?
I give it just 2 out of 10.
You're being exceedingly generous. Greg King?
I gave it 4 out of 10.
You've doubled, Peter, and we need a drum roll, but, you know, that's about as good as I'm going to get. Sound effect on the desk. What do you reckon, Dave? Look,
I loved it, but I am a huge Foo Fighters fan, I've got to admit. I'll be there in Geelong next week for them. I'm giving it 8 out of 10. I loved it.
Right. I'm giving it my first 0 in 5 years. It was absolute piece of toss. So just avoid it at all costs, folks, unless